lot of data manipulation we can do in the Power Query editor. So let's take a look. The way we get to the Power Query editor, outside of, remember when we imported the data, there was that option to transform data. If we would have clicked on that, it would have taken us straight to the Power Query editor. But another way to get there after the fact, which I mean, a lot of times you'll be manipulating data and you'll realize, oh, I need to go do something else when I import the data. Let me adjust that. If you're bringing data in via SQL, and you want to change your SQL query at some point, you've got to go into the Power Query editor to adjust that SQL query. So there's a few ways to get there. One simple way to get there on the home ribbon, I'm going to go back to the report view here, but on the home ribbon, transform data, click on transform data, and that'll take you to the Power Query editor. Another way to get there that'll take you specifically to a certain table that's already kind of selected in Power Query Editor is to hover over one of the tables over here on the right side, click on the triple dots and say Edit Query. That's another way to get to the Power Query Editor. Let's do that. Well, here we are in the Power Query Editor. As you can see, it's a brand new window that pops up whenever you click on Transform Data and the various ways you can get here. And there's so much data manipulation that can be done up here. Some really powerful tools. Now, again, I highly recommend SQL. Another reason that I recommend SQL, we talked about a few reasons earlier, is that if you ever have to go to another dashboarding tool for some reason, if you've done most of your work in SQL, SQL is a very versatile tool that can be used in almost every analytics platform. SAS, R, Python, Power BI, all kinds of different SQL database platform tools, Alteryx, KNIME. You can use SQL in nearly every platform. And so odds are that other platform you'd be moving to would also be able to take in a SQL data source. So if you've done most of your data manipulation in the SQL query, it's really easy to just take that SQL query into the next platform. If you did most of it in Power BI, oh boy, you're going to have to learn a whole new tools, all kinds of data manipulations in that tool so you can implement it there and just have a lot of rework to do. Even if you're not going to move to another dashboarding tool, let's say you wanted to take this data set and build some kind of a data science model. You can't really do that much in Power BI, so you might want to move it to something like SAS or R, Python. And if you've done most of your work to curate that data set, and that same level of curation is needed for the model you're about to build, if you've done that in SQL and all those tools, they take SQL as an input as well, port it over. No additional data manipulation to do. Versus if you've done all that extra data manipulation on top of it in Power BI, now you're going to be hard pressed to automate that, right? You could export the result of it from Power BI and then import that into Python, but that's not going to be great from an automation perspective. It needs to be repeated and refreshed every day. Just a few more reasons to do your data manipulation in SQL if possible, but there are some powerful tools here, and certainly many analysts will choose to do quite a bit of data manipulation within the Power Query editor in Power BI. So ultimately, when we're done, we'll want to click Close and Apply. We're not ready for that yet, but that's what this button's for. You can import other data sets right from the Power Query editor. There you go, just like we could from the report view. Entering data manually. Let's just see. I'll call out a few other things here. You can remove columns from a point and click perspective. You can choose to filter out certain rows, split columns. This one comes in handy sometimes. A lot of time, as you can see with the games data set here, and by the way, if you wanted to look at the weather data set, we just come over here and click on it. It's automatically taken the first row, the CSV file from the Excel file, and used them as headers. In fact, that is this promoted header step right here. You can think about the right side here, query settings. We didn't do any of this ourselves. All we did was use the GUI to get data, and it did all of this for us. It automatically detected that the first row was headers, and so it did that automatically. Now, if we didn't want that to be done, we could X out of this and it may affect subsequent steps. I'll do this. Oh boy, it doesn't like that. Now this step is airing out because we've deleted that step. But this is essentially a set of ETL steps, extract, transform, load steps. One is applied and then the next one and then the next one. A lot of times the order does matter. So I'm going to close out of this as well now. And what you'll notice is now our data set doesn't use the first row as a header. So if I wanted to build this myself, and there might be cases where occasionally Power BI doesn't use the first row as headers where you would want it to. If that's the case, this is a very useful function right here. So I can say use first row as headers, and there we go. We've got our data set. Use first row as headers is helpful merging queries, appending queries, you can do that. Now, I highly recommend the refresh, at least in the past, tends to work better when you link queries together in the model view in this view that we were looking at before. Linking together this way is typically better than merging together in the Power Query editor, but there could be use cases for both, I would imagine. So just to watch out there for merging queries. And again, I always recommend joining tables in SQL anyway, if you have that option. So merging queries, appending. So merging queries is kind of like a VLOOKUP where you're bringing in additional fields from another table. Could impact the number of rows actually, especially if what you're linking on, the data set that you're linking to isn't one row per that. If there's duplicates, in other words, it could actually change the number of rows in that table. So it's does a little bit even more than a VLOOKUP. But a lot of times people merge tables together because here's football columns. We also want weather columns. And so we want to merge in the weather data set. But then there's also appending queries. So let's say this is a set of football games, but then there's another data source of other football games that you just want to append to this. Usually you want it to have the exact same columns. You're doing essentially a union in SQL. In Excel, you would basically be copying one workbook and pasting it at the very bottom of copying one worksheet, pasting at the bottom of another worksheet. That would essentially be an append. So you're adding more rows to it essentially. So that's an option here, all on the home tab. You go to transform and you get a lot more. Some of these are repeated from the home screen. I guess the home screen has some of the more popular data manipulations, but now you have access to just a lot of other things. You can fill certain values, empty cells, again, splitting column, all kinds of options. Adding a column, we're actually going to add a column today. I'll come back to this. We're going to add a concatenation of the date and the city so that we can ultimately join these two tables together in the model view. So we'll come back to that, but you can create a custom column this way. Rounding, all kinds of other things here. We have some view options. Now this bookmark here, this formula bar, this is your friend. It really is. It's so easy to edit things just from the formula bar here. So this is really good, but if you wanted to turn that off, you can. But I guess I need to click out of it here. Yeah, but you want that formula bar. It's really easy to edit a lot of these ETL steps here from the formula bar. That's really helpful. We're back on the home tab. Again, I generally prefer to use SQL to manipulate data, but today we're going to do a little bit of everything in Power BI. And here's the thing, in the Power Query editor, the language that's typically used is the M language. And you can, when you search on the web for a particular data manipulation, you want to look for the M language for the Power Query editor manipulation. Now, once we get back to the regular report view, we'll actually be using the DAX language. So that can be a little confusing, but just keep that in mind that in general, when you're in the Power Query editor, you're using the M language. And when you're back on the main Power BI report view, you're using the DAX language. And we'll do some examples of DAX too, but I'm going to do a very simple example of the M language here. In order to join these tables, we need a column that is the concatenation of the date and the city. That's what we need to do. We need to combine fields together. And so I'm going to go to the Add Column option. I'm on the Games tab here. I'm going to go make sure I apply this after the current step. And I'm going to click on the Add Column, Custom Column. We're going to create a custom column here. Okay, so it brings up this menu. Let's give it a name. We're basically going to use it to merge the tables together. So I'm going to call this merge key. And then here we'll put in a formula. And again, this formula is based on syntax from the M language. So this is how you would join two text items together. In the M language, there's something called text.combine. It's basically the equivalent of concatenating fields in SQL. And DAX actually uses the term concat as well. DAX tends to be more, again, the language that's used on the main Power BI report page. It tends to be more like Excel formulas. This M language is a little different. So you may not use the M language at all. Again, if I were importing via SQL, I'd be using SQL for this. But here we are, we're using the M language. Text.combine, and then what we're going to do is feed it a list of text as a list. And that can be text in quotes that would always be the same for each row, or it can be a specific text column. And city is actually one of our columns, so it's really convenient. You start typing and it pops up the different columns we could use. And here's the city state that we'd like to join on. That's our first column. Now I'd like to take the city state and I want to put some kind of a delimiter between it and the date to separate the two. So I'm going to, in this case, you can see text as a list separated by commas. I'm going to put a comma here. Then I'll do quotes and I'll do a dash and I'll follow that with a quote. Okay, there's one more field we need to add to complete our field, and that is we need to add the date. And this text.combine basically takes all the things, the text that you want to combine together as arguments separated by commas. And so if we click on start date, which is the date field in our college football games data set, that'll add it here. And we can close parentheses. Now, when you're combining things together using this text.combine, I forgot to include at the beginning here, it uses an open parentheses and then it uses an open curly bracket. And then we also need a close curly bracket before the last close parentheses. So the format should look something like that. Now you may be asking, how am I supposed to know that? I looked this up on the web. Again, I don't necessarily recommend using the M language, although I'm sure it's a fine language. It just takes some learning. I'd prefer to use SQL myself. So there we go. We've got the three fields concatenated together. But there's something else we need to do. City state, that's fine. That's text. Dash is text. Start date should be date format. And this text.combine function needs everything to be in text format. So we need to convert our start date from a date format to a text format. And the M language does have a function that can do that. So it's called date.toText, and then I'll use open parentheses. This is a function, kind of like the text.combine function. So it starts with the function name, open parentheses, the argument, which is simply your date field. And then after that, we'll do a close parenthesis. So we're nesting the date.toText function inside of the text.combine function. And this looks good. Let's check it out. So I'm going to say OK. Ooh, did not recognize the date.toText. Okay, no problem. Let's check this out again. I think this one might be case sensitive. So let's capitalize the T, or the D, capitalize the T, and the T for toText. Now, I figured this out by looking online for a function that would take in the M language, searching for like M language, convert date to text. And that's kind of how I found this syntax. So let's try this, see if this works. Okay, it says error here, which a lot of times speaks to a format conversion error. Okay, we cannot convert the value 13410 to type date. And if we go over here, you can see, yeah, the start date has a value of 13410. We saw that when we were looking at the data set. We need to convert that start date first. Now, we could go ahead and try to convert it now, but this needs this step of converting the start date to from a number. That's how Power BI took it in, was as a number, to text, needs to happen before we try to apply this toText function before we try to create this merge key data column that we were just creating. And so if we want to insert a step before that, let's go to the step prior to this, which was one that Power BI automatically generated, change type. I'm going to click on that, and we can see right here, start date, that it's converting it, or it's using a type of integer 64 basically. And so this would be a good place to actually change that. We could just change it right here in the formula bar. And in fact, what I would try to do is find another date column to see exactly what text it uses for for the date format. I don't see another one converted to date. There's a lot that are in type text. Um, it ends up being type date. But another way of converting it very simply, a column is we look at the start date and we say, no, that shouldn't be a number. It should be a date instead. We just click on the header, selects that particular column. Another way of selecting a column is just to click on the header. And then we click on this symbol next to it, the data type symbol. I click on that 1, 2, 3. I'm going to click on date, and that will convert it to date. Make sure you want to insert a step. Yep. And then it wants to know if we want to replace the current step, which is great. The current step is about changing types, and it's currently changing it to int64. Why even do that? Why not just in this step change it to date? And so I'll say, yeah, I'll just go ahead and replace that. And let's see what happens. Now it says type date. Perfect. And it's converted to a date. That looks great. Perfect. Now there was another date in here, the refresh date, that had the same problem, right? It's taken as a number here. So let's highlight that. And well, now we actually have an example. And one way we could convert this is to click on the 1, 2, 3 and convert it to date. But we could also do that directly in the formula bar. So last refreshed here, notice it just says int64.type after the comma. Well, here's our example of start date that's now been converted to a date. Let's just copy after the comma, it says type date, and put that instead of this int64.type. That's another way that we can convert it. And that looks a whole lot better, yesterday's date. All right, now let's see if converting the start date to date solves our merge key problem. Now notice at this step, the fourth step, merge key was not created, and the table ends with last refresh, the last column in our games data set. But now, after the fifth step where we added the column, there's a new column, and doesn't that look good? If there is a city, it'll be city-date, and if there's not a city, it's blank. But that's exactly what we wanted to do, the city-state dash the date. So let's not start from scratch in the next case. I actually want to copy this formula. Let's go ahead and copy this formula here. And now we're going to click on the weather data set. And we'll go to the very end, the very last step, and put a step after that. We're going to go to the add column, tab again, ribbon at the top, and click on custom column. We'll call it the same thing. It doesn't need to be called the same thing. We can call it merge key 2 or something else, but we'll call it merge key as well. And I'm just going to paste in that formula we worked so hard on in the games table here. I think I copied an extra close parentheses there. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now we may need to update the column names here. The name of the city field is just simply called city instead of city-state. And you can see that it does include city-state. That's important. I set these data sets up to have city, comma, 2-digit abbreviated state. It was set up that way intentionally so that we could, in both data sets, so we could merge them together. So if one spelled out state and one did not, none of them are going to match. So that's important, and that is the case. But the name of the field, even though the format within the field, the values within the field are formatted similarly, the name of the field is city in the weather data set. So we'll just update this to be city. There we go. And let's see what our date field is also called something different. Instead of start date like it was in the games data set, it'll be called date. You can see that right here. Now in this case, date was properly converted when it was brought in for the weather data set. There's no need to convert anything, but it's still a date. And so when we use the text.combine function, similar to in the games data set, we need to convert it to a date first before we can concatenate everything together. Looks good. Say okay. Look at that. City-date. Looks really good. And it's always good to check your formula afterwards just to make sure, at least for a few rows, that it's in line with expectations. So I think our work here in the Power Query Editor is finally done. We're going to move on. Now we'll do some examples of DAX again within the report view, but for now, we're good. We'll go to the home ribbon and we click close and apply to save our steps. Close and apply. Now what'll happen is Power BI will spin a little bit, and if there were no errors, eventually this goes away and everything's updated. And what we should see is that there's two more columns in data. There's a merge key under games and a merge key under weather if we succeeded. If you like this video, I hope you'll consider liking it for me. And if you'd like to see more analytics, data science, and leadership training videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Finally, if you have any questions on what we discussed today, please leave a comment and I'll try to respond to it as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.